Hello Internet and welcome back to Trumps of Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you about books, movies, music that I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. One of the first videos I did on this channel was Robert Eggers' Nosferatu movie from last year. I discussed it in January. When I did that film review, I talked about how there was an original Nosferatu in 1922 by F.W. Murnau, which was one of the first Dracula adaptations and is one of the most respected silent movies ever made, and how Robert Eggers had made a new version of Nosferatu using the same names, character names as the 1922 version, but making something that was close to a Dracula film. And I referred to the fact that Werner Herzog also made a version of this movie in 1979, and that there was a novelization around the same time, which I had read, but I'd never seen the Herzog movie. One of the first comments I ever got on this channel was from somebody called Yassi Sophie, who said, the layers Herzog subtly adds to his Nosferatu, masterfully played by Kinski, is thought-provoking and brings more depth to the tropes, and this person highly recommended that I watch Herzog's version of the film. This is something that I've been meaning to do forever, and for whatever strange reason have never got around to, so I've now watched it, and today will be a discussion of this movie. Herzog reputedly thought that Murnau's film was one of the best, if not the best, movie to ever come out of Germany. And when he made his own version of the film, it was with great love and respect for the original. What he made is a strange combination of entirely new material, things that are almost movement for movement and shot for shot recreations of the original Nosferatu movie, and something in between where he uses visuals that are similar to the original but includes color and sound and spoken word. The movie opens with one of the most eerie sequences I've ever seen in a film, where Herzog has filmed mummified dead bodies. I believe I read on the internet that they were in Mexico, but don't quote me. In any case, they're not Egyptian. They're South or Central American mummified bodies, and it starts with very young children, and it shows images of these figures up until adulthood or old age, while this kind of slightly spooky 70s synthesized organ plays in the background, and the titles of the movie are on the screen in white. In many ways, this already sets up a lot of the themes of this film. The mummies look like they're screaming, a lot of them. And the question I think you ask after you've seen the movie is, were they screaming in life or are they screaming in death? Which is more terrifying, living or dying? So the main cast of this movie is Klaus Kinski, who Werner Herzog collaborated with many times, who I've also read he referred to both as his best friend and as a monster and a pestilence. Klaus Kinski is renowned for having been a criminal, a sex offender, and a very unstable individual. Bruno Ganz plays Jonathan Harker, because in this film, Herzog uses the names from Dracula, not from the original Nosferatu film. So Jonathan Harker, the Dracula character, played by Bruno Ganz, who later went on to play Hitler in Downfall in a kind of career-defining performance. And Ganz is great in this film too. Then Isabelle Adjani plays Jonathan Harker's wife, who in this film, for some reason, is called Lucy Harker, and Mina is her best friend. In all the other Dracula iterations, Jonathan Harker's wife is called Mina and her best friend is called Lucy. Lucy traditionally is blonde. Mina, Harker's wife, is brunette. That is retained, but their names are switched. I have no idea why. Also, Roland Topor plays Renfield and puts in the strangest, weirdest, almost comic, but keeps it just this side of creepy performance. Okay, so one of the things that really struck me watching this version of Nosferatu, and which is also very evident in the first version of Nosferatu, and which kind of I sort of forgot watching Robert Eggers' film, is that the main draw of any Dracula movie isn't Jonathan Harker or Mina slash Lucy, it's Dracula. And in the new film, that's really not the case, I think. Dracula is a supporting role. But in this film, Klaus Kinski as Dracula is the clear and absolute star of the show. And I really think that this version, this iteration of Dracula, is so unlike anything else because the original Nosferatu is this kind of creepy, weird, ghoulish figure. And Kinski's version retains this. You know, he has these rat like fangs at the front of the mouth, which is very deliberately supposed to look like a rat or a rodent. He moves in this kind of weird, creepy fashion. He's sort of hesitant, but he's also less evil and more just otherworldly. It's like he really does represent death. He's not a malevolent figure. He's just what he is, and he just does what he does, and he has no remorse about it, but he also has no malice. They frame Dracula in this version as almost feminine. He's very lonely. He's like a tragic figure. There's a scene when he talks to Jonathan Harker in the castle, and he says a line which is in many Dracula films where he talks about he hears the wolves crying in the night, and he talks about the children of the night and their music. And in like Vincent Price versions, this is often very kind of camp and theatrically delivered. But in this film, when he talks about the children of the night and the wolves, you almost get the sense that he loves them in a way that a very lonely individual often loves animals. As indicated by the mummies at the beginning, which show the kind of span of life, but also have this weird out of time quality because they're not fully decayed, this film is not only about death, but it's also really very much a film about time. And Herzog has created this visual language that really reflects that. Like, he's made a period film where people are in Victorian dress and they're riding in horse and carts and so forth. But he has these kind of weird light sources in a lot of scenes that kind of create this almost like postmodern or surreal, absurd language. Like there's a sequence, for example, where Jonathan Harker is traveling to the castle and you see these incredible shots of this totally ruined castle with like a sky moving fast behind it that really looks like something out of an early surrealist film. And then you have Jonathan Harker coming past the cliffs around the mountain, and there's a light source behind him that is obviously an extremely bright electric lamp. So although he's in the forest in the 1800s, he's very markedly lit by electric light in a way that they've made no attempt to disguise. There's another scene later when Dracula is traveling on the boat to Germany, slowly killing the men on the boat, and Kinski, Dracula, comes into frame, and it's a shot that is based directly on a shot from the original film. Maybe the others I've just mentioned also are, I don't remember, but I remember this shot from the 1922 film that he kind of comes into frame with the boat behind him. And again, he's lit with this extremely harsh white electric light that makes him look more ghoulish, but that also reminds you of the artifice and the time. So, like a man in 1979 is reaching back to 1922. As in the original Nosferatu, and also as in Egger's version, Dracula brings the plague with him to Germany. There are hundreds of rats that come running off the boat. They're all over the city, and people start dying. And Herzog really leans into this with lots of shots of people carrying coffins. What I think is interesting about the way that Herzog uses the plague, which is quite different from the other movies, is that he doesn't present the plague necessarily as purely negative. It's almost like, again, he's talking about death as part of life, and almost like this plague coming to the town frees the people of the town. Like there's a scene where Lucy comes and meets these men who are partying in the town square, and they basically say, "We've only have a few days to live, so let's just party." I felt like there were several things happening at once in this. One thing is that, like, instead of being satanic, this Dracula is more like pagan, like pre-Christian, and the rats and the animals coming into the city, it's like they're breaking the spell of Christian civilization and liberating people to become part of nature again. So it's like a pagan force, and it reminds me a lot of The Wicker Man, which is also made in the 70s, that is playing with this horror of like the natural world or witchcraft or pre-Christian traditions. But also, I think it's talking about how the reality of death is a liberating force in life. It's almost as if it's a memento mori, like a skull sitting on the desk saying, life is finite, don't forget to play, don't take it too seriously, that the reality of death is what brings some joy into the world. Now, that might be a weird thing to say, or it might sound like a weird thing to say, but it really comes home in what I think was my favourite scene in the film, which is where Klaus Kinski's Dracula comes to visit Isabelle Adjani's Lucy Harker for the first time when she's sitting in her bedroom at night looking into the mirror. And there's this, first of all, she is brilliant in this film. She's not only very beautiful and very elegant and very charismatic, but she also plays her role so subtly. And this scene really shows that. The door opens and Dracula comes in, but he's only a shadow. And as she sees the door opening and the shadow coming in, she does movements from silent cinema, where she does this weird kind of dancing silent movement, and then he's beside her, and then they have this dialogue where they are really negotiating as equals. She knows who he is, and he's come to speak to her because he knows the effect that she's had in Jonathan Harker's life, and he wants something like this in his life. So he comes to visit her and he says, "I'm Count Dracula." She says, "I know who you are." He says to her, "Don't worry, Jonathan won't die." She says, "He will, because everybody dies. It's the only thing that we know." And she says that death is cruel. Dracula disagrees, and he says, "What's cruel is when you can't die, even if you want to." He said something similar to Jonathan earlier in the film, that there's an incredible cruelty, there's an incredible pain in watching so much time go by. It's as if the absence of death renders existence meaningless. He's lonely, and he asks her to give him the love that she gives Jonathan. He says that the absence of love is the most abject pain. She refuses, and that's where the dialogue ends. He lifts his hands as if he is going to touch her, but then it's as if he realizes that if he does that, then it's not love, it's force. I wouldn't go so far as to say that this scene humanizes Dracula, because he's very clearly not human, and that's kind of the point. He has to reach across the gap between him and Lucy, and she has to freely meet him, and she does this in order to trick him, in order to keep him awake until the sun comes up. So I think staging Dracula as the tragedy of an existence without death, and then staging the plague like play, is Herzog's way of exploring how the reality and the knowledge of death can bring joy and vitality into the world, into life. There are also some interesting deviations in this film from other iterations of Dracula. One of them is that Van Helsing is kind of hopeless, he's kind of useless, he's almost comic, and I feel like this is Herzog pushing back against the 19th century construct of the doctor and the man of science as a man of wisdom. It's very unlike a lot of other versions of Van Helsing you see, which make him very heroic. And I also think that this kind of underlines the film's kind of exploration of nature and irrationality as being kind of outside of culture and Western civilization. Another thing that's kind of interesting is the ending, which I won't spoil, even though arguably I've spoiled the rest of the film. I felt like this version of Dracula, it was less like a horror film, and it was more like a fairy tale. It was like a gothic, tragic, absurd, playful fairy tale. Okay, so that brings us to the end of my discussion of Werner Herzog's 1979 version of the movie Nosferatu. Again, I'd like to say thank you to Yassi Sufi for bringing this film to my attention, or reminding me that I need to see it. Big up, as we say in Swindon, where I come from. To everybody else, I would love to hear from you too about what you thought of this movie, or if you have a favourite iteration of Dracula. Please let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for listening. Take care out there in the dark night.